What is going on, my fellow Summit Chasers, and welcome to another week of the Summit Success Series. And I'm gonna say I know that a lot of people maybe we get more engagement maybe for now. A lot of people have a lot of fun on the Summit Coffee Clubs on Saturdays, but this one is starting to become one of my favorites. And mostly, first of all, it challenges me. It challenges me a little bit, quite a bit. All these lives challenge me, but because it's something that I'm very passionate about. So for some of you that don't know, I kind of got my start in first of all, I started my first business when I was 18, but I got my first true enlightened position. I started educating myself. I started being opened to what it means to develop ourselves, personal development. What does that really mean? And I did that because I was a drug addict at a very young age, and I had to go through programs myself. And then doing so, I actually ended up working in an addictions unit for a short period of time. But then seeing it was really interesting because you see people who are they would come in, they seem on the outside, they're like VP, CEO, very well off, all this kind of stuff, but they have all these demons. They have things that hold them back. And then you get people on the other side where it's like, okay, that kind of stereotypically sort of makes sense. But like what makes them different? And then you have the CEO who ended up in here, and this one who goes off and does very successful things and continue to do successful things. So it's like what makes them different? What makes us make these decisions versus these decisions? What makes this person more open-minded than this person? What makes this person grow faster than this one? What makes this person succeed at 25 and this person have to wait till they're 50? A lot of Ray Kroc, when he took over McDonald's, he was 52 when he finally took over McDonald's. So he always had it in him, but what was it that was holding him back for the rest of the time? So this one has become this show's become my favorite, probably because it's one of the things that I am probably most passionate about. And when we're working with our clients, and whether they're contract clients or individuals, business owners that we work with in our portfolio, they're really surprised as how much work that they have to do on themselves in order for their business to succeed. In order for them to succeed in anything, whether it's growing in their current company, if they want to get a promotion or perform better, it starts here and here, right? And it's just been so much fun, seeing when the ahas, the mental habits being broken and new ones being formed, new serving habits being born. So I'm very excited to talk through that today. But before we introduce a very special guest that we have today, make sure, I say this every week, make sure you're going to yplsummit.com and get your tickets for the Young Professionals Leadership Summit on October 19th in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. Very excited, very, very excited for this one. We actually, and I said this last time too, we had a meeting, but then we had a meeting yesterday, literally yesterday, on some of the great things that we're going to have. We're going to have prizes available, prizes based on your engagement, based on opening up, based on you learning and utilizing some of the things that we're teaching you. So we're very, very excited for this event. It's not going to be one of those stuffy conferences where you hear somebody speak for half an hour, 45 minutes, you take some notes, everybody claps, and then that person gets off stage. Bring up somebody else, you take notes, everybody claps, they leave, and then by 1 o'clock you're wishing that they didn't take the coffee cart out because you're tired and you haven't retained anything, and then you hit a red light on the way home, you're frustrated, and you forget everything. This is going to be something truly transformational, and I mean that because we're going to get you outside of your comfort zone. In order to transform, in order to evolve, in order to progress, you have to intentionally put yourself in uncomfortable situations to grow, and we're going to be doing just that. And for those of you that may be deterred, I would say don't let it deter you. And if maybe that doing that in person scares you, that's fine. You can do it virtually. It's $60 for your tickets to show up in person. Again, they're priced for wherever you are in your leadership journey, whether you haven't quite decided if you want that management position or if you're going for the next role, or you don't even know if you want to be a leader. It's priced appropriately. So $60 for in-person, $20 for the virtual. You can see it anywhere. And it's going to be, if you do get your tickets, whether it's in person or virtual, you will have access, you'll have lifetime access to the actual footage itself. So you can rewatch it, take your notes, and do all that kind of stuff. So I'm very excited for that. And again, go to yplsummit.com, yplsummit.com to get your tickets. Now, tonight for this show, we are very excited to have I think, a truly inspiring guest, and I know that you will too, who knows a thing or two about innovation, leadership, and designing for the future. So please join me in welcoming Liya Safina, a digital design director and innovation expert currently living in Hawaii. I'm not at all jealous because it's already getting cold here in where I'm at in Canada right now. So good for her. We're very jealous of that, but really happy for her. I'm really proud of her. She has over a decade of experience in digital innovation. She's seen it all from bootstrapping startups to designing for Toyota's futuristic city in Japan. And I forget what it's called right now, but it is insane what they're doing. And yeah, it's nuts. I kind of can't wait for her to break it down a little bit. But her vision is clear: is to build a future where technology serves human needs, not just revenue models. So give it up for Liya Safina to the show. Oh,
Hi, everyone.
how
Yes,
was
so
that? Is that okay?
thank you. What a great setup. I really, really appreciate it. And yes, absolutely. I'll be happy to chat a little bit more about the city that I worked on. But just to tee up the intro a little bit more and say how this is relevant to your audience, because I know there's a lot of people who are very hungry for entrepreneurship success, to be better leaders, to have their companies succeed. So I currently work on a freelance basis with Google's innovation team, but over the course of my career, I have seen over 100 of different founders and collaborated with over 100 different founders. I kept track up to 80. And then past 80, I was like, I think it's around 100, 120 now, 130.
Yeah.
But what's important, right, is that my job is to be the catalyzer for their companies, right? To really understand the product market fit, to understand the audience, to understand how innovation can come and supercharge their offering. But also, as I partner with founders and as we go on this journey together, I observe their strength, their weaknesses. I have seen companies be acquired, skyrocket to unicorn success. I've seen companies fail. And over the time, the more you work with these founders, the more you start seeing the flags or some early signs of where are the weak spots, where are the growth spots, where are the opportunities, and how this founder, the CEO, this chief operations manager, design manager is dealing with them. So I would be really happy to chat about it today. And thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And thank you for that. What was, as you were working with these founders, like you said, some of them would go on to unicorn status, get acquired, or go on to some, outstanding success, and then some wouldn't. What would be one of the biggest differences between the two?
The biggest difference is welcoming feedback and being aware that they have blind spots. So I would say there are only two buckets of founders if we were to grossly generalize, right? Where I'm a rock star, I'm a badass. Even if I doubt internally, I will never project this doubt. I will never be vulnerable. I'm a badass. I'm gonna, crush this round. And then there are people who are openly saying, look, there are certain things I'm really good at, and there are certain things that I have as gaps. And give me this feedback. I'm hungry for this feedback. I'm hungry for growth. And those people, even when their first companies, if their first companies have not worked out, they go on to pivot and create better second company, third company, eventually to success. That they become serial entrepreneurs if the first company doesn't succeed, but success is the common denominator there.
Yeah. Have you seen them? And what you just said is maybe they wouldn't succeed. They had that attribute where they didn't take the feedback. They were very closed-minded. They were almost scared to admit they were wrong, whether it was ego or whatever it was. And we'll get into some other reasons why that could have been in a minute here. Did you see any of them change that perspective, change that attitude or emotional function without having to fail once? Did you see them change prior to failing, or for the most part was it I failed this business and then I learned from that and then I started this one and then I ended up having the correct mindset in that second or third business?
Yeah, so I don't think it is about the failure of the business, but it's about that shift, that trigger that creates the shift in the mindset from closed mindset to growth mindset. And unfortunately, if you have not trained yourself from early age or from your teens or 20s to have that growth mindset, the cost you're going to pay doesn't have to be the failure of the startup, but it will be a painful cost where you're forced to face your shortcomings, where people quit. There's a scandal in the press, and there's a bunch of these founders out there who get a reality check. And, apologies and PR announcements aside, that reality check, what it gives them is curiosity of what was that blind spot, you know? And so it doesn't have to be your company that fails, but it has to be uncomfortable enough situation for you to stop the habit, because we're creatures of habit, right? We go through the path of least resistance. We are going to keep doing something that works or semi-works until we're faced with harsh reality, right? So that catalyst event doesn't have to be big, but it is painful for a founder or leader to change their ways and to start being curious and more open-minded.
Mm-hmm. What would you, because one thing that you said, it's the difference between you seeking it out. So the difference between the growth mindset and kind of this closed, not growth mindset, is one seeks out this uncomfortable feedback, constructive criticism, and all this kind of good stuff. And the other one almost waits for it to happen to them. What's the difference between that constructive criticism that finally knocks them out of it and that constructive criticism that they just ignore and then keep doing their same old?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think for context, we can step back a little bit and see what happens leading up to the boiling point, right? I would also like to bring a little bit of an outsider perspective here. I'm originally from Europe. You're probably picking up a little bit of an accent. I'm from Belarus. I lived in Moscow. I lived in New York for 8 years before moving to Hawaii. So I moved to America with a very different perspective on how things are done in life and business. Better or worse, or it's all perspectives are fair. But one of the biggest surprises professionally working in an American environment that I encountered is, if the feedback is not delivered normally, people have to be pushed and squeezed and have this anonymous annual reviews to provide any kind of feedback. And when they do provide this feedback, it's so subtle. People are so afraid, even though it could be anonymous, people are afraid of critiquing or criticizing. So the feedback that you receive through those, and I was on the receiving end and I was on the giving end, right? The feedback you receive is confusing, because it's too polite to be useful. It's too polite to be helpful. And even if they try to go bold, it's still too soft for you to take any action. You're like, okay, maybe I'll correct here a little bit. So the problem starts with what's happening behind the scenes. People are talking about you. People are discussing you. People are exchanging glares when you say something that doesn't work. They maybe there's not discussion, but they're like, not right. There's the vibe, and then people start talking. Then people start like, I don't know, should we give her feedback or should we just fire her? Because firing is way easier. Feedback is so hard, right? And so the number one way you can prevent this, as the person who might be the issue, like we all have some sort of issues, we all behave differently, right? I would say being a foreigner in America, you're just weird by default. It's just because of the clashing of cultures until you learn how to navigate it. The number one thing you could do to avoid this painful process is to be very open to feedback and to proactively say to people, if I'm doing something wrong, tell me. I don't take offense. I want to know it. Please, so invite people, and also just say, you cannot offend me, right? I'm eager to grow. I want it. So inviting it is step number one. And then number two is being curious and asking why several times. So you've gotten that piece of feedback. Maybe it's a little unclear. Maybe it's too polite. Maybe it's too soft. And you're like, oh, everything's fine. Maybe find that person and say, like, look, what did you actually mean? Give me some examples. Because then after a few questions, you're actually going to get to the root of it. And the root might be something that they didn't even express. My problem, to give you an example, was my first year in America. I did not do small talk at all. So I would just come up to people like, hey, I need help with this, or like, let's work on this. And people are like, what about, how was my weekend? Or like, I have other priorities. I don't have time for your priorities, right? So I was just in the mindset of get shit done. And I was kind of moving like a bulldozer a little bit, which comes with a cultural baggage, but also comes with a personality. And so it took me a few years to appreciate the beauty of social lubrication, the beauty of cultivating interpersonal relationships, the beauty of understanding the context of what a person is. But the way that I received the feedback at first was, she's not listening. You are too proactive. You are too eager to have your ideas implemented. and I was offended. It was painful, but I still really wanted to learn, especially being a guest. Back then I was a guest, now I'm a citizen. But so this is just a very concrete example where once something happened, you have to track for these very, very light signs and unravel this thread until you get to the bottom of it. And on the other end, it's just growth. It's just you reaching your best potential, you being a better team player, you're being a better communicator, you having more influence on people, you having more impact. There's only benefits on the other end, really.
Yeah, no, and that doing it intentionally, I think, is the key. And you gave a great example of that, is when somebody gives you feedback. Okay, was that the whole truth? What situation were we in? Were they maybe afraid, maybe on their boss, maybe they're afraid to give their full feedback and their full opinion in front of other people? Okay, I need to make a note of this. I'm going to go talk to this person. And like you said, just ask why 5 times. And then usually you can get to the root cause of some things. At least if you ask, and if it's somebody who is scared, you start asking, they're going to be like, oh, okay, they're open to this. Oh, they're not firing me right now when I'm being honest. Okay, cool. Or they're not getting me in trouble. Didn't have to go that far. But that's a way that you can start opening up some of those windows and doors for other people to be more honest to you. But even some people, they know that. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think I might offer. I also wanted to offer an example of what happens as an opposite of that, right? Because I also observed what happens when people are not inviting feedback. So 2 cases. One case is somebody that I have, because I try to give the gift of feedback as well, because I know how hard it is when you don't know that you're doing something wrong and nobody's telling you, right? So I tried to offer this gift. I said it to somebody, and then they told me, you hurt my feelings. And they said it was not, I don't think they were really receptive of what I was trying to communicate. They hiccuped on how it was delivered or projected their own feelings to it, which I must say I tried my best to be extremely mindful of how I provide it, right? So I thought 5 times before I did it. And so the reception was not let me think about what I'm doing and revisit it, but you hearing it hurt, and it was just hurtful. What that does to me is that I will not provide feedback to this person. They just rob themselves of more insight of how others see them by reacting emotionally. So it's a really good idea to pause and to breathe and to not say things as they come, but to think about it a little bit. And try to see, is there anything I can take away and know that the other person had the best intentions? And if they do end up hurting you and you want to communicate that, a good idea is to say, this might have hurt my feelings, but I welcome more. Maybe do it in a different way. Say it like this next time. So help me help you, give you feedback. That's case number 1. Case number 2 is a former colleague who did not get a promotion at an agency that I worked in. And he worked really, really hard. He was on top of his game. He was absolutely amazing, but he did not get the promotion. And at the end of the day, they ended up bringing somebody from the outside. And me and him, we were talking about it. And the real reason was that his Instagram was a party boy Instagram. And that was not reflective of the values and culture of the company. His boss would not tell him that. His colleagues would not tell him that. He does not ask for feedback. So he will never know why he didn't get promoted. And it was by no means because of his capabilities as a worker, as a director, and he wanted to be an executive director. So that's another really interesting thing. When you welcome feedback, you open a lot of doors for yourself. But when you don't know. You can stumble many years until you actually understand the real reasons of a certain failure.
Yeah, it's that intentional, like, root cause analysis, and you can't do that unless you're open to that feedback, and other people also know that you're open to that feedback as well. And one of the things we wanted to talk about tonight, and kind of some of the value that we wanted to provide, or insight that we wanted to provide, is what creates some of these biases or these blind spots that stop us from either making the right decisions or not looking into why certain things keep happening. Like, why do I keep not getting jobs? Oh, it's because on your Instagram you look like a frat boy who's always partying, and that's not our culture and values, which is fine. so it's what, and even if they did hear that, maybe not that in that specific example, but okay, hey, you tend to make decisions really reactively during these types of, when things are stressful. You tend to go back to the old ways of doing things when things get difficult because of X, Y, and Z. I always, during this live, I always kind of go back to some biases that we talked about, and I showed you some slides beforehand. But there's one that I think that let me skip to this one, which is right here. So I've talked about this one before, and it's the availability bias, and it's the tendency for people to rely on immediate examples that come to mind when evaluating a specific topic, concept, decision, or situation. Essentially, if something can be easily recalled because it's recent, vivid, or emotionally charged, people are more likely to think it's representative or important. So it's a representative of reality, even if it's not. And that example that you just gave, where if you were to give feedback or react to feedback in that moment, you're basically falling victim to this bias because you're charged. Your animal brain is firing up, so you're just pulling what's the most recent thing. Maybe you just watched the Terminator, so now your first reaction is just to be mad, right, or whatever it is. But this is a big one, and so people kind of get a better of an understanding of what the availability bias really is. It's also called, the other name for it's called cognitive substitution. So our mind replaces a difficult question, and that difficult question is, how representative of reality is this situation that's in front of me? And it replaces that question with an easier one, which is, how available is this information to me? So this is a test that I usually do, and I gave this example on here once before. Is I was doing a talk on communication with some nonprofits in Gwinnett County in Atlanta, and I played a little trick on them. I'm not gonna lie. And it went something like this, where is anybody here afraid of sharks? Like, anybody here seen Shark Week? Like, and everyone's like, yeah, I know what Shark Week is. It's like, okay. And then a few minutes later, I'm like, everybody see all those fires in California? It's wild, right? Like, it never rains there. It's always like people's houses are, and everyone's like, yeah, I have a friend who's there, and all that kind of stuff. So implanted that in their mind. And then I asked them a question a few minutes later. Has anybody seen that movie San Andreas with The Rock, where like all of California just like falls into the ocean and that kind of stuff? And everyone's like, people are like, I know The Rock, and so I understand that. Okay. And then I asked them a few seconds later, I'm like, how often does flooding happen in California because of earthquakes? And everyone was like, pretty often, I think. And then you look it up, it never happened ever in the last 200 years or whatever it is.
Maybe.
But because they had the emotional attachment, because either some of them just like The Rock, or maybe some of them saw the news of people losing their houses and this kind of stuff, they're picturing the movie. But anyways, it was vivid. They could picture the movie and this kind of stuff. So they equated, right, earthquakes and flooding to the movie, right, in California. So they're like, that was more available to them. They're like, yeah, it happens all the time, when it like never happens. But that's like a silly example of the availability bias. So if you're in a stressful situation, you have to make a decision, or if somebody gives you feedback and you're stressed, you're immediately going to go to what's the most available thing, what's the most vivid, most recent, most emotionally charged thing. And a lot of times it's doing the same thing we've always done, or I'm going to defend myself, I'm going to hold my ground, I don't want to be wrong, I don't want this feeling of being wrong, and people can't rely on me, or feeling like I'm losing status. But what are your thoughts on the availability bias and how it plays into people's success, and whether it's entrepreneurship or climbing the corporate ladder?
Yeah, I think it's a really important one. And if we were to extrapolate it, I think it plays a bigger role in more aspects of our lives than we imagine. First, in terms of communication, I actually once read that in order to be an interesting dialogue partner, communicator, you should not go to the first thing that comes to your mind when reacting to something. So for instance, when I say sticks and stones and you're like, break my bones, right? And it's like, yeah, duh, but this is not interesting. It's not adding any value. How about you say sticks and stones might break your bones if you're not good during this conversation, So skipping that first instinct of what you want to say and actually jumping to the opposite of it, or to something else, might make you a more interesting conversationalist. And then in terms of startups, I think it's the same exact thing. Whenever we have a new trend and innovation, everybody jumps on the bandwagon. We'll have Uber for this, Tinder for this, ChatGPT for that. And so yes, in the beginning, it's easy to raise funds for that, but it's way more interesting to see, but what is missing? What is the opposite? What is not considered? What is an interesting, unexpected twist on that, right? So I think, yeah, this is a really big one. So thank you so much for bringing it up.
Yeah, it's huge. It's and like you said, when it comes to business as well, and marketing, I'm talking about marketing as well. Like you just said, the shiny object syndrome. Like the availability bias is like the bias that marketers and politicians use all the time because they invoke emotion constantly. They get things in front of you more often. So like these like retargeting ads and that kind of stuff. So they make it happen more often so that next time you're, like today, I think it was today. Yeah, it was today where I was trying to get I was looking at some supplements for my dad. He wanted some like cognitive support supplements and that kind of stuff. And they're on the other side of the room. And all of a sudden I started getting these ads on my phone. And then a few days later, I'm like, oh, maybe I should get some. But that's the idea of putting things in front of you more often, because then if you see it more often, it's going to come to your head like, okay, what's this fix to this solution? Okay, I saw this AI chatbot ad 3,000 times yesterday, so that's probably it. Maybe I'm just thinking of that. And then again, they when they invoke emotion, they play on fear. It's like in any old school, I guess kind of old school, like sales tactics and sales strategies. It's okay, what happens if this won't work out? What happens if your business fails? What would that look like? And then you're picturing like losing the house and all these kind of things, like, oh no, I need what you're selling, right? Like we do that for a reason. It's this availability bias, so that when you're making a decision, the most emotional invoking and things that you've seen more often come to your head, and then that's what you base your decision off of, not so much the full breadth of information, not taking a step back. Like you said, when somebody says something to you and you have to fight that urge to give that emotional response, give yourself space from the situation, look at the full breadth, right? Because that availability bias is going to be the thing driving your decisions, and that's not necessarily what you want. If you're running away from a tiger or something like that, when you have to make really quick decisions, sure, right? Sure, make those quick decisions. But when it comes to success, we need to think a little bit more long term than that. Yeah. But that is an interesting one.
If can we get a little political, just for example, or are we steering clear?
Politics, like I said, they strive on that, so thrive on it. Sorry, so yeah, go ahead.
An interesting example, if anybody watched the debates, was it yesterday or 2 days ago? The debates recently. It doesn't matter which side you're on, it doesn't matter what you support, but like just purely from the mechanics of the conversation and how to win a debate. I think what Kamala did that was really interesting, maybe it's somebody on her team, a strategist. So they utilized this bias among Trump's team in a very interesting way. So they've been talking about the size of her crowds versus his crowds for a very long time. So perhaps this is something that his team prepared him from. Like, this is how you should react if this comes up. But what he wasn't ready for is her saying, hey, people, actually go to his rallies. That was a curveball. And because that was outside of his availability bias, right? He did not consider that. That really threw him for a loop. And that was one of the most interesting moments of the debate, right? So it really doesn't matter who you supported. What is interesting is the mechanics of that setup, right? And how in a debate, it's an emotional conversation as well. That happens in negotiations, that happens when you pitch your business, that happens when you interview somebody for a job, right? If you really want to test who they are, you can do something a little bit unpredictable outside of their bias and see how they react.
Yeah, they call it a pattern interrupt, right? And I used to do that when I would do like workshops and stuff, and it's hard to get people's attention. They're talking and that kind of stuff. Just shut the lights off. They'll stop talking. Be like, what the heck was that? Like, it's a pattern interrupt. It stops. It stops them on this train that they're on, this path that they're on. It's like, oh, well, this is different than I expected. Okay, what's going on? Like, so using those tactics, and that's what you do. They see it in like cold calling tactics. Like, you get a cold call, you're typically, you say, hey, I'm not interested, and you're expecting the salesperson on the other end of the call to be like, oh no, not a problem. Okay, I'll see you later. Sorry for bothering you. And instead, they're like, look, I don't have that much time either. Like, if you say something like that, that's not what they're expecting. They're kind of like, okay, I'm paying attention now at least, right? So it's a tactic to use in a lot of different situations. And I think one of the biases that probably causes a lot of availability biases is that normalcy bias. And I've been part of way too many businesses that fall into this, and particularly in certain industries, more classical market environments, that don't have a lot of change and innovation. They're like, okay, things are moving a little bit quicker, but let's just keep doing what we have been doing because that's what has been working for me before. Because you're relating, this is the action that I took, this is the reward that I got. That reward felt good, so I'm going to keep doing that, even though I know if I really step back and took an objective analytical look, it probably isn't going to give me what I need. And that's a big one that I see. And I don't know who quote this was. It's not me. It's somebody else's quote. I wish I could find it. But it is human's nature to associate current profit with recent actions, even though it should be evident that current plenty is the harvest of planting seasons long ago. So if you want to get something different, you don't keep doing the same things. You want something different, you got to do something different, right? So people making those decisions to do something that's outside of their comfort zone, they're so attached to, I do this, I get goes like a dog. Like I sit down and I lay down nice, I get a treat. So I'm going to keep doing that. Business is not that simple though.
Yes, and I actually would love to offer an experiment to our audience. It gets really addicting once you try it. It gets really, really addicting. Taking something that you do the same way all the time and trying a completely new approach. You can model it after a mentor, you can model it after a conference talk, after somebody you saw somewhere else, but just trying something new and seeing a different result becomes extremely interesting. So I'll give you a couple examples. One example, I was recently taking a negotiation course, and the negotiation course had us train some of the tactics on calling your phone and internet provider. And I've done that before. I actually tried that. So it was really easy for me to fall into, okay, this is how you do, this is how much you ask. Then when you ask for their supervisor, this is like what you bring up. But then I actually tried something different, and I started asking them about their personal life. And I've never tried it before. And then what happened, this T-Mobile manager was at T-Mobile for 7 years, and I've been a customer of T-Mobile for 7 years. And I just started like, hey, we're 7 years club. I can't believe it. Where are you from? So I literally started asking him all about himself. And I've never done that before, nor have I ever tried doing that. And lo and behold, he refunded $300 of fees to my account. Previously, he said it was impossible. But I tried just because I was in this course, and I was like, let's try this. This is scary. But that was one of the things that really made me try new sports more, made me try new approaches to dating, made me try like so many different things. And once you start seeing different results by just tweaking a few things, you start being addictive. What else can I tweak? You just start, disassembling everything and kind of like productizing your decision-making tree. And as I said, it's very dangerous.
Yeah. I think that's brilliant though, is starting with something as small as negotiating with your T-Mobile rep. Just something very simple as that. Like, okay, and a lot of people read a lot of books, right? And they probably read a lot of the books, but then don't utilize any of the things that they learn, at least very much of the things that they've learned in there, especially if it's things that gets them outside of their current way of doing things or comfort zone. So just taking something that you learned in your book. If you're a business owner, try a different script in your outreach for a week or two and kind of test some things or whatever it is. And there's that saying where when people want to make these changes away from the things that they've currently always been or the way they've always done things, it's when the pain of staying the same outweighs the pain of changing. Don't wait till that point. Like the other saying is, if it ain't broke, break it, sort of thing. I'm not saying to do that right away all the time. People are out there just, my business is running perfectly, so I'm going to break everything. I'm not saying that, but it's being proactive and getting ahead of those things and practicing. Like I had a great podcast with a lady named Karen, and I can't wait for that one to come out. But it's in putting yourself in these positions of intentional discomfort. Like apparently she sleeps outside because it's uncomfortable. And that's the face that I made too. And she lives in Switzerland, and it gets cold there. So and she sleeps outside all year. But she does it for that, to put herself in those uncomfortable situations. It's like she has like a thing over top of her, it doesn't rain on her and that kind of stuff. But she puts herself in those situations, and that's just one example. But if you do that consistently, do it intentionally, you then see it more as practice. So then when you do have to make those difficult situations, they seem easier because you've technically flexed that muscle and worked that muscle before and more often. But I love that example.
Yeah. The preventative part of it is interesting, but also I would say a crisis is a really good time. Maybe not immediate crisis, maybe not a crisis, hopefully no one's life is in danger or anything. But if your company is failing for some reason or underperforming, you like the time to make a pivot, the time to experiment, and you don't have to make big experiments. You can run micro experiments, right? With one location, or with one particular department, or with one particular feature of the product. But the crisis is a really good time to experiment, because if you keep doing what you're doing, you're just gonna continue that trajectory. But if you try a bunch of new approaches, you might, swerve out of it.
Yeah. No, exactly. And I think, well, you want to take this one? So how would you overcome the fear of doing something differently? Sometimes it can be intimidating to do that. I think part of that is what we've already talked about, but if you want to elaborate a little bit.
Yeah, it's cultivating the habit, actually. And habits are one of the hardest things ever. There's a reason why there's, books on habits. What's James Clear, right? The book that everybody talks about.
Habits,
Stacking habits. But there's a reason, because as I mentioned before, we are creatures of habit. We're creatures of inertia. So once we set up a system, once we fall into a pattern, it's so much harder to get out of the pattern, rather than when you're starting from scratch. Way easier starting from nothing than unlearning, right? And that's why I would suggest, and this is something that I do all the time, is really digging into a habit and how that works. So I'll give an example from personal life. I think weight loss or weight gain, whatever, like anything related to your body, is a huge industry, a huge subject. A lot of people are struggling with it. It's really, really, really hard. And there's nothing harder than forming a habit around working out, eating. I mean, there are a lot of harder things, but that's one of the really hard things, right?
And popular.
Yes. And so I'll give you an example of how diligent and smart you have to be around your habits. So for instance, when you're trying to lose weight, you might get, okay, I'll work out more, or I'll introduce a new type of workout, or I'll cut out the carbs, and you might try it and it's not working. And you're like, oh my God, I'm a loser. I can't stick to it. Like, where's my motivation? Where's my stamina? Where's my discipline? But if you dig deeper, like for instance, for me, the case was not that I can't stick with it, but that I'm an emotional eater. When I have extreme amounts of anxiety, or something's not working at work, or something's like, I cope with immediate relief comes from like, oh, let me get something that will immediately make me feel better. So in my case, the habit that I had to unravel was not sticking to a diet, was taking a few steps back and saying, when I have anxiety, how am I coping with it, right? And so that sometimes when you're trying to change a habit, when you're trying to stack the system, if it's not working out, that means you have to take deeper, and you like start looking into more root causes, into triggers, and what happens when. And so when you're trying something new, sometimes you have to, if it doesn't work out, just make it smaller. Give yourself a brief of like, instead of, when you move into a new city, instead of making 10 new friends in a week, you say, why don't I go out to one new place every day? So you make you chunk these new steps outside of comfort to a small enough chunk so it makes it less scary.
No, I like that. And like making them the goals, and you say even when you're developing your strategy for your business, is you want to make a lot of your goals proximate. So things that you absolutely can achieve and even overwhelm. And then you start stacking wins, and then achieving winning becomes a habit, right? And then you start to build positive inertia from there.
And what happens on the other side? Sorry to interrupt, but just real quick, what happens on the other side, once you master it enough, you start becoming a little bit of a risk addict. You're like, yeah, I'm going to try this new thing. Yeah, I'm going to take a risk there. Yes, I'm going to try this. So there's a huge reward on the other side once you master the initial harder part. It's the curve.
It's just that initial, and that's just the funny thing. Like, you look at a lot of people, like these, I don't want to say they're not thought leaders, but they're, like these tough-minded influencers, like the David Goggins, and who's it, like Jocko Willink, and there's a bunch of them, and they're like, you have to have discipline. It's all about discipline. It's like, and they make it seem like it's just like you have to be a different person in order to be able to achieve these things. Yes, you need discipline. You need the discipline at the beginning to start the momentum. Then once you have momentum, it just becomes who you are. And then where the discipline comes into play now is to then stack on top of that one, where you've already figured this one out. So your discipline is always, your focus of the discipline will always be changing as you grow, but you don't need to be this like insane Navy SEAL disciplined human being. You just need the discipline to create the momentum, and then you're good.
You're bringing up two really key things that I'm so glad you bring up. Momentum is huge, and learning how to create it artificially is amazing. Like when you don't feel like doing something, but you have to, you start thinking about not how I force myself to do it, but how do I create the momentum around it. So like, for instance, when I don't want to do something, I might spend a couple of minutes on Pinterest inspiring myself, or I'm going to go look at someone's Instagram who's doing it really well to just create the inspiration a little bit, get those juices going. And then the other important thing that you mentioned is, I think, the self-image, which again is super tied to the habits. Who am I as a person? I am a person who does not wake up early. I am a person who does not work out, or I'm a person who works out every day. I'm a person who only is a successful startup founder. I'm not a loser, right? And that idea of self could be really helpful, but could also be really toxic because it holds you back from all the other opportunities. And one more thing to add, I actually used to be a startup founder myself. Almost 10 years ago, I was in an accelerator in San Francisco called, back then, 500 Startups. Now it's called 500 Global. And one of the most powerful educational moments we had there, basically they bring you in as founders, you go through this boot camp, they invest in you, they introduce you to the people. But some of the most important moments was this fireside chat series with people who failed their businesses. And there were tears, and there was vulnerability, and there were so many stories. But those people were much more impactful as teachers and as inspirational figures than people with successful startups, because they know what it takes to fail and go back and succeed. Or, they know what it takes to fail and pivot and do something with that failure. So yeah, it's the idea of self, and it's okay to not succeed all the time. That doesn't mean anything. That's just like how you rewrite the narrative, right?
Yeah, no, 100%. I think that's a good kind of pivot into, speaking of pivoting, into kind of the last bias or trigger that would cause blind spots. And you're talking about people that failed some of their businesses, and I've seen this happen a lot. People that do fail their businesses is because we talked about inertia and momentum, is they have momentum and inertia in the wrong direction, or at least in a direction that is no longer serving of them. And this is one of my, I almost said my favorite bias, like not my favorite bias. None of them are my favorite, but this is one of the most interesting ones, just because we see it so much, and we see it in so many varying ways. It's because it's not, so the sunk cost bias, a cognitive bias that leads individuals to continue and endeavor once an investment in money, effort, or time has been made, even when the current situation suggests that the cost of continuing is greater than the potential benefit. And this is, again, it's not just money, like sunk cost could come in many different types of modalities or resources, of being time, ego, status, all those types of things, right? And we see this a lot, where a leader will make a decision, business owner or executive or whatever it is, will make a decision, and to save face, they will just keep plowing ahead. Or, I've put so much time, I've sacrificed so many things, I missed my kid's first birthday for this, and there's no way that it can't work out. I have to just keep going forward in this direction, because if it doesn't work out, that means I failed. Well, if you failed, you failed. So this is a really interesting one. I'd be curious to see if you've seen this before, fallen victim to it, or all the above, or any of the above.
Oh my God, yes. I've seen it so many times. There has been a startup that comes to mind that I worked with a few years ago, and there was a flag, this yellow to red flag with their CEO that was really surprising to me at first. Was that the CEO was great at fundraising. He was great at storytelling. He was great at imagining the vision. He was great at, they already produced a great product. They already did the first round of funding. We were working on a website. And what I started noticing is that the CEO's blind spot was surprisingly management. But Like
Mm.
when you're like, you know how like sometimes people are like, we need a couple of CEOs because they need to complement each other. You can't be good at everything, so you have to, you know, have yin to your yang. So he was, and he unfortunately did not have an assistant, which unfortunately as a CEO you have to have an assistant. You have so much on your plate. It's
Mm-hmm.
very tempting to focus on what you do well and to ignore the things that you don't want to do or I'm not doing great. So then an assistant has to be there to remind you of all the other responsibilities to manage your day or to find, you know, help find people who can take care of those. And so he was so caught up in the vision that he just spent money month after month after month after month. The timelines kept moving and moving, and it was not a thing for him. He was like, yeah, we're good. And I was like, oh my God, like either they have bottomless funding there or this is a problem, right? And at the end of the day, they ran out of funding, and it's not my job to manage him, right? I was brought in as a digital expert at that point, but I was flagging those things. They ran out of funding, and instead of doing something with the inventory, with the brand, with a physical space, they kind of like the sunken cost bias, but also the all the biases we were talking about.
All of them.
Back to their investors, and they double down.
No.
They double down, right? And the company doesn't exist anymore, unfortunately, right? But sorry, go ahead.
No, that's usually the consequence of that, and you see it a lot with startups. And this is one of the things. This is one of our big, like we do like questionnaires and we do like a thorough audit and that kind of stuff when we're looking at partnering with companies, especially, you know, adding them to our portfolio. Is you see a lot of, especially startups, when they have this, we call it like a love affair with their product or service, before they even know if is this going to work. Do people want this? Do people want to buy this? Is it going to solve the problem that we think it's going to solve? Are we going to be able to market it? All this kind of stuff. And they have this love affair and this again, the sunk cost bias of I've committed to this. I told my parents about it. I told my high school teacher that said I couldn't succeed about it. And I dumped all my savings and money in it. There's no way I'm not going. There's no way I'm not creating this specific thing. If you have a problem you want to solve, you can't be married to this one idea and one way of doing things. You have to be married to the idea of creating a successful business or a successful future, whatever it is, not this one thing that you tie your identity to. And I think that's a big part of the sunk cost bias is we tie our identities to these things and we're not willing to let go, even if it means sacrificing success for it.
But that case honestly actually inspired an offering that I started to offer to the companies that I work with, which is a very interesting one. Before that particular startup, I really thought this was not my job to do that, and that's their internal thing. But I now do workshops on the weaknesses before we start with any creative work, before we start with any digital innovation work, before we start with any strategy work. We of course first talk about the vision, the product market fit, the ambition, where do you want to be the North Star. But then after that, we get really raw and we start talking about what are your blind spots, what can you not do, what are you not staffed for, what are you understaffed for, what are the weaknesses of your team, what are out of the 20 things that startup a company needs to be great at, what are you not good at. And before we get into any vision and execution, we're like, let's first patch these. Let's first get some quick wins on this. And this includes also personal weaknesses as a leader, as a team manager, as somebody who's supposed to captain the ship, right? It's all about the team weaknesses as well. And it's all about the product weaknesses. So it's kind of like a triple bundle, which is really interesting. And I realized that without it, you can have a great vision, you can execute a great product, but then it starts falling apart because you don't have the fundamentals.
Yeah, no, that's the basis of a successful strategy. A good strategy starts with the kernel. Kernel starts with a diagnosis, and that diagnosis has to involve your weaknesses, things that your opportunities, your threats, and your weaknesses, and patching those up first. And then how do you create strengths? How do you leverage your strengths and mitigate those weaknesses? So that's really, really key. And you don't want any of these biases getting in the way, because later on they might not bite you in the butt, like you said perfectly. They might not bite you in the butt right now, but in a year from now, not even a year from now, they absolutely could. And if that's your you just want to have a fun year running a company, cool. Right? But I doubt that's what a lot of entrepreneurs get into it for.
Yeah, this could be as simple, though. It doesn't have to be this. This is, of course, a bigger thing, but it could be as simple as, how do your business partners or your investors view you, right? So you don't need a huge room of people to detect that. It just takes a couple of strangers who has never seen you speak before, and get raw, honest feedback from them. Am I annoying? Am I too loud? Am I not eloquent enough? Am I laughing in an annoying way? Like, what is your impression? Like, that one step provides founders sometimes with months of saved frustration and things that they think they're doing wrong, but it's actually the complete other thing.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful, and I think that's a great place to kind of. And I think everybody listening got, which a lot of people on X today, which is great. But I think a lot of people got a lot out of that, and there's a lot of actionable things that you can do. So I love that cherry on top. But Liya, thank you so much for coming on. Where can everybody find you if they want to learn more about you and all the cool things that you're doing?
Yeah, I have my website, liyasafina.com. I hope we can post it, but it's basically my name with no gaps, just .com. On LinkedIn, I'm very active there, so feel free to reach out. And I have a newsletter as well on LinkedIn, so please follow it. It's all about innovation and how culture, innovation, and new technology impacts our world and creates huge tectonic cultural shifts that change the ways that we do things every day.
That's impressive. That's all I have to say about that. So yeah, sign up for her newsletter. That sounds extremely impressive, and that's definitely something that in this fast-moving world, if you want to achieve some amazing things, and if you want to overcome some of your own biases and see the world, see what's out there in the world, and how other people are finding success and utilizing technologies and that sort of stuff. I mean, definitely give Liya a follow. Sign up for her newsletter. But again, so thankful for you to come on. But everybody, thank you so much for being here. X, you were amazing for this round, which is awesome. But until next time, everybody, keep chasing your next summit.
Bye.